While I think the term is contentious, Metroidvanias are unquestionably my favorite genre of games, and to this day is the only genre that I will buy on a whim. This isn't to say I have no problems with the current state of the genre, I am just as satisfied with its consistency as I am frustrated with its stagnation. As of March 2018, there has been no game that has done to Metroidvanias what Undertale did for RPGs. For every mediocre Super Metroid clone that rolls out of some indie dev's tired, underpaid fingers is a genuine gem just waiting to be snatched from Steam's ever-present bargain bin. I bought Environmental Station Alpha after seeing it being given equal billing with Axiom Verge in a Matthew Matoses video, and I don't regret it, especially considering the $8 price tag. ESA is a good Super Metroid clone, or in this case it might be seen as a middle ground between Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion. You're given a clear directive, like you might in most mission-based games, but how you wind up at your goal is entirely up to you. Considering the story, I don't think it's unlikely to say that the developer made ESA with the intention of reimagining Metroid Fusion as a game more similar to Super. Instead of constantly being interrupted by Adam, the player is dropped into the world after a few text prompts, and is set free to do as they will. This had to have been extremely cathartic for the dev. I can imagine his dismay after seeing a setting so rich as Metroid Fusion's being squandered on linear level design, and a heavier focus on cutscenes. While I happen to be a big fan of Metroid Fusion, ESA has certainly made me realize the value in his presumed perspective. The way the decrepit old spaceship colony bleeds story as you cut through its dense atmosphere with your simple laser is not only satisfying but also greatly rewarding. Instead of the narrative assembling itself like Connect the Dots, the player pieces the story together himself, just like a puzzle. It's the aha moment you get when you happen to find a data terminal and suddenly it all makes sense. This kind of reward would not have been possible in Metroid Fusion, and I think that's one of the points ESA is trying to make. Another might be its damning defense of the classic less is more argument, at least when it comes to the number of pixels at the end of your gun. The combat in ESA wouldn't be nearly as fun as it is if it weren't for the short-range plasma blaster. This makes fighting much more position-based. In a way, it's similar to fighting games. The player has to always be simultaneously aware of their position on the screen and their enemies. This means more movement is involved in combat, but the most important thing it does is raise the stakes of every encounter significantly. If you played last year's Metroid Samus Returns, then you might have been disappointed by just how easy it is to perch from a ledge and mash the shoot button until all the enemies are dead. This has remained somewhat of a problem throughout Metroid's history, but generally it's not a big deal, especially when levels are designed to be claustrophobic, and in Metroid they often are. ESA eliminates the need to even consider this problem by expanding upon Metroid's roots. At the start of the original Metroid, Samus has low range just like the robot from ESA. While this made dealing with anything in Metroid a hassle, it was never an unsalvageable idea, and ESA certainly makes the case for more Metroid-like games to feature limited range. Although that might be unfair to Castlevania, which could just as well be argued to have made the same case 20 years ago. But make no mistake, our little robot friend's weapon of choice is a gun, not a sword. You can shoot in 4 directions, you can charge it, and it always has enough range to feel somewhat safe. The same can't be said for all 100 weapons or so in Symphony of the Night. However, ESA is not about accommodating complexity. It is, like many other indie games, a throwback to a bygone era of classic games. But this doesn't mean ESA's use of minimalism is shallow. On the contrary, one of the most clever things about the game is its HUD, which uses nothing more than a row of 5x5 grids to display which items the player has acquired and which items they haven't. The visual information displayed on the HUD is just as meaningful, maybe even more so, as a level number that appears next to your character in an RPG, indicating how far you have come and how far you have to go. I wish this sort of careful design went into every aspect of the visuals, however. When you have less room to work with, every pixel must be placed precisely, otherwise all the symbols at the bottom of the screen wouldn't mean anything. But when you up the resolution, the artists have a lot more wiggle room. Obviously, I'm not saying I want all games to take place on a 5x5 grid, although that might be interesting. What I am saying is that each pixel in ESA isn't placed with as much intention as the next. The detail of some sprites contrasts with the simplism of others. As an example, look at the wind currents versus any of the bosses. The designers intentionally made the wind currents less detailed so that it could be easily distinguished from the background, but that doesn't mean it looks good. It is sacrifices like this where the inherent shortcomings of pixel art are made more apparent. The dev could have made the wind currents just as beautiful as the bosses, but it would have made the giant plant monster fight a heck of a a lot less fun. All I'm trying to say is that video games are not paintings, and just like any other medium, they will be subject to limitations. ESA is still a great looking game, if only for how wonderfully the visuals communicate. Everything is clear and easily digested despite its frequent use of darkly lit environments. This may be in large part to the bright orange color of the protagonist. Despite the game's maze-like structure, I never find myself getting lost on the screen. It's always extremely clear where the player is in relation to everything else. Just like its predecessors, ESA is no stranger to unfortunate technical issues. By far the biggest problem I have with the game is its tendency to lag in high-density areas. These laggy rooms are few and far between, but for a game as low-spec as ESA, it's disappointing to see that it wasn't properly optimized. Though keep in mind I was playing the game on a somewhat outdated computer, but I've never had any trouble with lag on any of the Steam games I've purchased before. If only I'm having this problem, then feel free to correct me in the comments. For an $8 game, ESA's quality is serviceable, if not always consistent. As of this recording, I'm 14 hours into my first playthrough of ESA, and I plan on continuing to play much longer. Once I'm done with the game, I may decide to do an update analysis of what I thought about all the content in the game, because I will be 100% completing it. I have no doubt that I will come back to this game sometime in the future after I beat it. It is, after all, a stellar entry in my favorite genre of games.